Hello, and it's nice to be back with you. I'm Stephen, and I'm coming to you on a beautiful spring day. Life is full of its wonder, leaves have been colored, and flowers are in full bloom. Some of you have asked for some time now, and now it seems to be a good opportunity to begin this. But some of you have wanted me to speak on depression. What is it, where does it come from, and how best to deal with it? This is a difficult issue for so many of us here today in America and has entered almost everyone's home in another way or in one way or another. In its simplest terms, depression is a subjective experience that something is withholding the fullness of life. As depression deepens and becomes more compelling and commanding, it is almost like a once vigorous life is being shut down. Darkness seems to pour down over us, and life loses its flavor. Depression itself, and the darkness that we use to define it, may seem alien to people and may seem confusing to people who do not experience this overwhelming disease. But let me assure you, for those of us who struggle with it, no explanation is necessary. And for those who surround us, we should like to include you in this as well, because perhaps the knife that cuts the deepest in the many conditions of depression is the fact that in some respects we often alienate ourselves from the very people in the world that love us. Those which we are closest to seem to be somehow shut out of our lives. Depression can begin in uncertain ways, and we cannot always know just how this darkness has gotten into us. But what we do know is that for the most of us, it's a progressive type issue. Early on, it seems as though our windows into the day suffer some lack of brilliance and become obscured. Then we find that doors into our tomorrow seem to be locked. And ultimately, walls can feel as though they're being built around us. And when it comes to this, friends, it is so difficult to have a meaningful and joyful relationship with either ourselves or the world that we live in. There are many different approaches to depression. I just want to touch on a few of them. Probably the most common today amongst the 30% of American adults who are being treated for depression is the pharmaceutical techniques. And these, for me, and as many of you have experienced, is an attempt to throw a blanket over the symptoms of depression, the despair, the fear, the anxiety. And in so doing, we hope to stimulate the biological and chemical aspects of our mind that we call feel-goods. And in some instances, the pharmaceutical approach has merit, especially when the depression is so deep that we need some, at least temporary relief from the feelings that overwhelm us. Another common approach to depression is the therapeutic and the cathartic approach. And that is where we release to professionals, friends, and even to ourselves the most intimate details of the conditions which surrounds our stress and our anxiety. And in this case, this approach does also offer merit, especially if we can point to a trigger of the depression, such as the loss of a loved one, a personal injury, a betrayal in friendship or love. These often initiate the conditions which set up into us as this darkening kind of despair. But for the most of us, the genesis of this depression is often not known. It is something that we come to feel deeply and seem to be almost reined in by it. So that is where the message of more comes to you, with a perspective of our lives. And a sense of recovery really ultimately depends on our facing the right direction. You know, a friend recently came to me, or was brought a daughter of a friend, was brought to me, and she exclaimed that her life had become full of pain and suffering. Mutilation had begun, and thoughts of suicide were very prevalent, which is, by the way, one of the telltale signs of serious depression. Others might include addiction to one sort or another, take another pill, have another drink. All of this is an attempt to diminish the pain that we feel. And in the beginning, self-medicating ourselves can seem to offer us some relief, but ultimately it just digs the well a little deeper. Other symptoms of depression might show up as death-defying behavior, including outrageous sex and stimulation, anger. And these two touch on this deep primal feeling that allows us, temporarily at least, to sense something over and above the darkness which seemed to surround us. But coming back to my visitor, whose life was full of pain and suffering, I looked and spoke to her quite intimately about the reality of finding a way to walk out of this pain. There is something about the overwhelming pain that we experience in depression. Something is missing which deepens the pain. And what's missing, friends, is hope. Hope is so often a casualty of depression. And without hope, we sense no valued possibility. Life seems to be shut down. Darkness seems to surround us. Hope is such a critical aspect of recovery. And in the following few sessions, we're going to speak to specific techniques and strategies to find and bring that hope back again. But hope can dawn anew for you. Hope will dawn anew for you. And when it does, it returns to us that sense of possibilities and even faith itself, which as we recover from that dark wilderness of despair, we find that in front of us is placed a lantern, not just for today and tomorrow, but the enduring lantern of faith, which holds for us possibilities and invites us back into the hands of life. Another thing that I often hear and have heard, which is more of an outer experience of depression, was a friend who told me that he was having difficulty finding a break. And that essentially he was saying, if it weren't for the bad luck, I would have no luck at all. Well, this deserves a deeper look, because oftentimes the bad luck that seems to surround us in our outside world is something that results for us supporting the very interface, that very force and power that we have spoken to so often, that outlines our journey through life, that very power and force that we are intended to dissipate, and which so many of us and all of us do from one time to another. But the conditions of this force always have some things in common. They're erosive in our life. They break things down. They tear things apart. They diminish our wellness and often steal our vigor. And how these show up, and it's important that we understand this, because what we're doing really is we're serving this very force or darkness which we least want to. But they often show up and live within us in ideas that are outdated, in institutional dependency. They show up in beliefs of specialness. They show up in senses of aggression. And they often show up in something that we feel comfortable doing and we seem entitled to, but it has huge consequences, and that is in judgment. Recovery and answering the right direction in life ultimately defines us as beings and peoples who discern very well, but judge very little. We might want to reflect on this hope and suffering a little further. Because whenever we suffer deeply, We often sense that we have entered a wilderness with no particular guidance, unmapped and uncharted. And yet we really call upon the hand of friendship, which we often divorce and resist, to help be that signal to move out of that which surrounds us. And the mystic that stands before you is dropping breadcrumbs. And if you see them and follow them, they too will take you to the wood's edge, into a glorious dawning, unlike what we have come to expect as normal. The beautiful thing here is that it asks us to change our world relationship, but it doesn't ask us to do it without support, hope, and a brighter tomorrow. As we begin this walk out of this darkness, beauty will more often frequent us. We will know the call. The song of the bird will be more sweeter. The embrace of lovers will be more deeply. I can think of nothing else to better explain and illustrate for you the situation that we're in today. Let me pick up, if you will, the condition of our lives. This is a little plant that has been severely restricted by the container. And the container for me reflects these outworn ideas, our cultural dependency, our supporting of material and gadget world, and it has restricted the growth of these roots into new and fertile soils. And this, friend, is what is so necessary, that we remove ourselves from the containers that we have come to be comfortable in and place our roots anew into the fertile soils of possibility, to break out of the restraint. And you know, one of the illusions of our relationship in this culture and to our world today is that when our roots do, our aspirations do reach the edge of the container, they start to encircle it, which is really a dooming and locking up type of situation. But even though subjectively we feel we're going somewhere, but friends, we haven't gone anywhere really for a couple of thousand of years. And it's time that we become lifted and break free of these constraints. We need to do that individually, and we need to do that together. We need to trust again completely in this wondrous life which has begun us and sustains us. We have to see our place in the circle of life as being meaningful. We need, while there's time, not to ask for a bigger container, but to experience that very essence of basic trust once again. We have it within us, and as we make these individual changes in our life, which we will come to speak about in another session, it's not that uprooting and leaving the container doesn't have a few issues. There will be some suffering, and there is uncertainty, and there will be a few pinches of pain, but all which we have become all so used to. But now it'll be efforts in the recovery, in the remembering, in answering the call of life. So, so important. I want to speak quietly to so many of you who've experienced this deep depression without a sense of where it began, no particular trigger. And I want you to be reflective and join me in the mystery a moment of those who came before you and who are now maybe percolating into your life, those which we stand in for, those who preceded you in the journey of life, and who now reside in that next to us reality which I've frequented in my freezing experience and also in the bee terror. And these people did not always leave this world in a happy, joyful manner. And so often they're asking us, and they come through our subconscious, and they're asking us to assure them that all is well. Because as we feel, they feel. And if you feel depressed, carrying a lot of negative thoughts and ideas, they become more anxious and they become more concerned. If this is a genesis of your depression, you will have dreams that will be frequented with familiar faces. So in your meditations and prayer, speak to them, say hello, and most importantly, instead of confronting the situation or world that surrounds you with, I can't, please suggest in your thoughts and prayer that you will find a way, because you will. Life always had. And it has huge consequences in our subconscious, which is a capillary of sorts, which connects us to so many of the mysteries of life. Words and thought have such a power in that subconscious. And those beings who have preceded you and now look for some resolution of their own will be much more gladdened by the word and the thought that we will. Because friends, indeed we will. And throughout our lives, the genesis of depression is many. Again, we will look more closely to it. But for so many of you that hurt and pain, your reaction to today's world is not totally unexpected or unnormal. Because friends, the sensitive nature of you most wonderful, beautiful beings, so many which are struggling with depression, has allowed you to sense through your compassion the issues of today's world. Children do not hunger alone. Forests do not fall alone. Honeybees protest their going. And for those of us who live directly in life's hand, the pulse of all of this is an overwhelming thing. And yet we're going to be asked and look forward in the coming issue. There may be 2 or 3 of these, by the way, because I want to do it justice. So friends, I remind you that we must rise above the conditions which encircle us today. And to do that, we must leave these containers of culture, traditional beliefs, and fear. Fear of death, a huge one. It just doesn't need to be there. It can't be there. Yes, we'll give our bodies up, but we won't give up our wonderful essence. Carry that on. I want to remind you, just around the corner, but a few days from now, a live presentation coming your way through Susan Duval's seminars. This is a presentation you don't want to miss. There will be evidence and conversation about these other worlds and the fertile soils which we are expected, allowed, and will gain immensely by extending our roots into. So please come, register, and hopefully I will see you there. Thank you on this beautiful day. I hope its beauty is touching everybody